you have to understand exactly who your target audience. And here's a great way to know who that is. Who's sitting in your congregation right now? Because your target audience, maybe intentionally or unintentionally, is who is sitting in your congregation. So you never want to bait and switch. As you're trying to figure out how do you wordsmith things that's going to connect to that unchurched, dechurched person, you don't want to risk alienating the people that are in your church, and you certainly don't want to risk watering down or changing the message. But you have to change language. Language is everything.
Welcome to Season 4, episode number 35, the 159th episode of the Missional Marketing Podcast. My name is Bart Blair, and I am joined by the CEO of Missional Marketing, Mr. Jason Hamrock. Good day, Jason.
Good day, Bart. How's it going, my friend?
I'm doing very well. I'm excited about today's podcast episode. We're doing another burning questions. We got out to a rip-roaring start last fall. We were doing a lot of these, and then we kind of backburned them for a while, and now we're kind of doing them again. And I know where you live. It is burning outside. Where I live, it is burning outside. And right here on this podcast episode, it's burning. We're gonna answer some burning questions. Before we do that, we do want to remind those of you who are listening to this podcast that we are going to be, Jason and I will both be at the Church Communications Conference in September, the 18th and 19th. I think I have those dates right.
I think so.
18th and 19th, September 18th and 19th in the Dallas-Fort Worth area at a church called Compass Christian Church. And you, if you're listening to this podcast, you really ought to plan to be with us there. Discount code is all lowercase friends. That's right. I think it gets you $100 off. So if you use that discount code, like you're in business, come join us in Dallas. The end of September, I guess it's middle of September. I'm going to link to the registration in the show notes. Want to make sure that you know that that's happening. I talked about that in the opening for our last podcast, and I wanted to make sure that I mentioned it today. And that's all I get to say about that. You want to get to some burning questions, Jason?
I do. Yeah. And what's fun about that conference we're going to, we get into stuff like this. So yes, you want to come to the conference for sure, but let's jump in.
It's going to be great. Okay. I'm going to ask you a question, and we're going to let you answer. You haven't had a chance to review these questions. I have not. You don't think so. I'm going to ask you a question, and then you're going to riff, and then I'll respond to your response. Right. Okay, you ready? I think this is the big question, and I like this one. How can we effectively reach our target audience without compromising our message? How can we effectively reach our target audience, people who are far from God, outside of the church, without compromising our message? And I think this question comes from a place where people are concerned about balancing the need to be, I'll use the word relevant and connectable with an unchurched audience, while at the same time staying true to the truth of God's word and their core values and their mission and who they are. How do you navigate that, Jason?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I spend a lot of time in this space, as a matter of fact, because I get to head up our website build division. So churches hire us to build their website, and I do a lot of the coaching. And literally this morning, I'm on with my friend Mariah and John, and we were talking about how do you say the right words to connect with your target audience, yet not, water down or misinform them on what the church is trying to be. So for example, we know our job and our goal is to go and spread the gospel to all nations, right? We've been commanded by Jesus, go do this, right? But you don't really want to say that on the homepage of your website, because people that are unchurched or dechurched have no idea what you're talking about. What do you mean, make disciples? I don't even know. That's not common language for them. So you have to be somewhat creative and artistic on how you talk. So an exercise I'll go through is I'll say, well, tell me who your target audience is. And I don't want to hear, well, people are target. Well, of course, people are your target audience. I hope it's not like cows or monkeys or something. It's people, but more specifically, who. And it all depends on where you are in the country. If you're in, Orange County, California, that's a different clientele of people you're trying to reach than, Iowa, where I grew up, or Florida, or the Northeast. You have to understand, exactly who your target audience. And here's a great way to know who that is. Who's sitting in your congregation right now? Because your target audience, maybe intentionally or unintentionally, is who is sitting in your congregation. So I'll ask the question. I'll say, well, be honest, give me the average age. And I'll hear, it's probably about 53-year-olds, which means they might be empty nesters or they're almost empty nesters. They're probably couples. They're doing well in life. They're not at retirement age, but they're well in their years. Somebody like me, somebody like you. I'll say, okay, well then why are you trying to reach a 25-year-old? Tell me, why are you trying to reach a 25-year-old? Are you doing anything that's going to actually connect that person? So you never want to bait and switch. So as you're trying to figure out how do you wordsmith things that's going to connect to that unchurched, dechurched person, you don't want to risk alienating the people that are in your church, and you certainly don't want to risk, watering down or changing the message. But you have to change language. Language is everything. And so it doesn't matter what digital tool you're using, social media, or your website, or Google Business Profile. You want to be true to who you are. Yet if you are trying to reach a younger generation, then you got to ask yourself, guys, are we doing ministry for younger people? Do we actually have stuff for them? So as comms teams, we can easily bait and switch something. You got to be careful with that, because I want consistency. And this is probably my last point. I'll turn over to you, Bart. I want consistency. I want to see, if I go to your Google Business Profile, if I check out your socials, if I go to your website, and then I come in person, is there continuity to what I'm experiencing? Because no doubt people are going to check you out if they're thinking about going to your church, and then they're going to watch for a while. If they then walk through the doors and go, whoa, this is not at all what I've been experiencing digitally, you missed it. You want to have continuity and consistency. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's really good. Okay. I think you live in this space all the time, as you mentioned, because you're helping churches write their ad copy or their website copy. And when they're writing their website copy, we're trying to help them connect to an audience that doesn't yet know them and that doesn't yet follow Jesus. So I'll share it like this. I'll try to be brief. I think that every church needs to go through the exercise of placing themselves as missionaries in their culture. So if you were going to go on a mission trip into a foreign field where the culture is different and the language is different, you would need to do both some language and some cultural training before you go. You will also likely go with a translator, someone who will help you contextualize the things that you're trying to communicate to the people that you're trying to communicate to. They will also help you navigate social nuances so that you don't step in it while you're in that foreign culture. And we do, I had friends that went on a mission trip years ago to a country that was predominantly Hindu. And one of the things that they came back and shared was that in the Hindu cultures, they believe in many, many spirits. And they do all kinds of things to worship and appease many, many spirits. And so instead of leading with a conversation about Jesus in those cultures, they led with conversations about the Holy Spirit. Because these people live in a culture in which there are all kinds of spirits, and they're constantly trying to appease spirits that they think are angry, or, there's good spirits, bad spirits. You can introduce them to a Holy Spirit. Now, the conversation about Jesus is going to come up at some point in that conversation, but you're getting their attention with a conversation about something that is already super relevant for them in that culture. Similarly, in our North American culture, we have to understand what the needs, the wants, the hurts, the hangups are for the people that God has called us to reach. And we have to figure out how to deliver our messaging in a way that gets their attention. Nobody who's far from God, I'll say nobody. I'll just go on a limb and say nobody. Nobody who's far from God, nobody who doesn't follow Jesus gets up on any day and goes, I wonder who I should become a disciple of today. Oh, we've got the answer. You should be a disciple of Jesus. Well, of course, that's where we want to lead people. We want all people who are not saved to come into a saving relationship with God through Jesus Christ, the risen Savior. That's what we want. But we have to figure out what the culture that we're trying to reach is really living in, what people are wrestling with. And we need to take our language and shift it in a way that makes sense and connects with them. I would say this, very, very short. I'll wrap this up. Go through an exercise. Bring a group of people into a room with a big dry erase board and make a list of all the most commonly used phrases that you hear in your church, sermons, worship, ministries? What are the phrases? What's the language that we tend to use in this church? Then bring some people in who you think have a really good finger on the pulse of the culture that you're trying to reach, and ask them to help you rephrase those things in a way that will make sense to the audience that you're trying to reach. Yeah. Go through that exercise. Sometimes those people who I'll just simply call them translators. They are the translators in your church who take the messaging and the mission that you're trying to accomplish and help you contextualize it to the audience that you're trying to reach. So that's all I got to say about that.
Oh, gosh. Okay, one more just response. I often will do the same thing because you're not trying to reach everybody. You can't. You're trying to reach that audience that you just know we got to go after those people, whatever that looks like. I will also say, hey, do this inspirational exercise. What are those phrases that are said in the pulpit? What are those phrases that are said on the stage for the host, or in the lobbies or in the bathrooms? You got pictures everywhere. What are those phrases? Because that's reality. That's what's communicated when they're sitting in the room and they're on your campus. My question then is, does that relate to that unchurched, dechurched person that you're trying to reach? And if so, awesome. If not, maybe think about changing your language. And to your point, go find that language. And now you're going to be able to tie it all together. And so it kind of becomes a bigger exercise than just a website build, right? Or just what we put on socials. This is a bigger exercise. You got to bring in your leaders. You got to bring your lead pastor in the conversation. Okay.
Good.
All right, let's move on because I could go an hour with this stuff. I love it. And if you want to connect with me, okay, try and we'll maybe have an hour conversation on it. But okay, let me ask you this. All right.
Okay.
Is online, and I haven't even studied this yet. So is online marketing essential for our church to grow? And if so, how can we manage it effectively?
Oh, there's two questions there. Okay.
Ooh. All right. Let me say it again so everybody hears it. Is online marketing essential for our church to grow? We need online marketing to grow our church. And if so, how can we manage it effectively?
Okay. I'm going to answer this question by saying no, absolutely not. Online marketing is not essential for your church to grow. The church was growing for almost 2 millennia before there was ever any such thing as online marketing. So I think we would be foolish to sit here and say that it's a necessary thing or an essential thing for churches to grow. That being said, it's 2024, and we have a tool at our disposal that generations prior did not have at their disposal. And therefore, I think that if we're not implementing an online marketing or a digital outreach strategy in our overarching outreach plan, I think we're missing out on an opportunity, and we're missing out on the use of tools that we are blessed to have. And so, obviously we are a company called Missional Marketing, and our goal is to help churches leverage their digital platforms to reach more people online. We believe that there is a mission field out there. We believe that there is a mission field online. I am a very, very hardcore advocate for moving people from the digital space into incarnational. I personally want my churches that I'm coaching, that I'm working with, to open the front door with the digital, but really move people towards an in-person incarnational experience. That's my own personal agenda there. But I don't think it's essential, but I think it's a missed opportunity if you're not taking advantage of it. Now, how can you manage it effectively? I'm going to be really short on this, and I'll let you riff on this a little bit. I think that number one, you have to evaluate what tools you think you can manage most consistently, and you have to determine what budget you can allocate towards using the tools that you think you can utilize most consistently. Because I think in digital marketing, online marketing, consistency is the most important thing. We're not looking for a flash in the pan. You cannot throw $5,000 at your Christmas Eve service and not market or promote anything else all year long and expect that to make a difference.
Right.
You do need to come up with a holistic plan that works with the life cycle of your church, that you can allocate budget and financial resources to, and also platforms that you can consistently manage so that you can be more consistent online. And I would say that that's, to me, consistency is the key. And I'll leave that at that and let you answer that.
I got 2 points: pie charts and thank yous. Okay, you ready?
Okay, I need this. What's a pie chart?
Let's look at the pie chart. Okay, everybody who's sitting in your seat at your church came to you somehow inside of a pie chart. Okay, they either drove by the campus, they came to an event, they are invited by a friend, they saw some other traditional thing going on, right? Or they found you digitally. There's probably some more, but you get my point. There's a pie chart of everybody who's sitting in your seat falls in some pie chart. So my point when I talk to churches about this, I go, how big is your digital slice of the pie? How big? Because that thing can be massive. It might be sliver, or it could be huge. Do you need it? No, because the gospel will continue to grow. Like you said, we've been doing it for so long, but people, I don't know about you, but I never leave home without this. And I'm holding my mobile phone. Nobody leaves home without their phone. So people are reachable. So the pie chart thing, I just always want to talk about that because you have to recognize how big is that for our church, okay? That's the first thing, pie charts. Thank you. Thank you to Google and Facebook. And here's why. 20 years ago and longer, we would always say this, everybody would say this, man, the church is so far behind, ... We're so far behind in everything, ... We're the last to catch up, ... But we have the greatest message anybody will ever hear in their life. I remember those days. Well, thank you to companies like Google and Facebook, because the church is a small business, just like everybody else. And Google and Facebook said, you know what? We're not going to allow like the Home Depots and the Lowe's to just dominate Google and the hardware. We're going to allow anybody to show up. And, if you follow the rules, you can get in that local pack. You can follow up. So the little guy has a fighting chance. Well, guess what? Thank you to Google and Facebook, because they've given the churches a fighting chance to show up with everybody else. And so we imagine us going, I like that YouTube thing, but no, we don't want to use YouTube. Well, are you kidding me? You can literally now do anything in YouTube and be just as competitive as a monster company. The rules are the same. You just got to stay up to speed and actually get up to speed with what's going on. And I see a lot of churches moving that way. So I don't think we can, I'll say this, the Big C church can't say anymore, well, we're just so far behind the curve because of money and no, not anymore. Not anymore. So it's because we're lazy. So do we need it to grow? Well, no. But boy, that'd be foolish to not utilize the tools that God's given us to move the needle, to connect with people who need to hear the best message they'll ever hear in their life.
Okay. I'll let the mic drop on that just a little bit. That's good, Jason. Good. Okay. Hey, we have time for one more question. And okay. I'm going to ask you a question. You mentioned Mariah earlier. This is actually a question that she sent in to us.
Oh, thank you, Mariah.
All right. Here's the question. What is the best way to staff our communications team? What are the must-haves? What's the best way to staff our communication team? What are the must-haves?
Wow. Well, thanks, Mariah. It's so much goes in my mind when I think about that. Obviously, like budgets, like staff budgets, how much do we have to hire people, volunteers, how many talented people will give up their time? So you kind of have to have that conversation to figure out, what are the resources available to us? And then you got to have that conversation about, well, what do we keep internally to either use a staff person or a volunteer versus what do we outsource to a vendor like us? People then, hire us for stuff. But I would say that must have would be somebody who has ownership in we call them a comm director, or they may wear lots of hats, but one of them is they're the leader. So it starts with them when it comes to how we communicate internally and externally and all the different communication channels and all that kind of stuff. So you got to have somebody who will own it. Okay. And typically that's somebody who has some experience, or at least they're hungry in that space. You won't get very far if you have somebody that wears like 3 different hats and one of them is comms, and they only spend a few hours a week on that because they have worship or they have student responsibilities. It just gets really difficult. So I would say a comm director, so some kind of a director would be the number one thing. Beyond that, it's really, really, really smart to find somebody who's really good in social media. because if you're pretty good in social media, chances are you're digitally a little savvy. So you could probably also own a little bit of the YouTube. You could probably also own a little bit of your website. But website could also fall under IT. So I would hire a social media person full time and try to give them, several things. Maybe photography also they own. Not that they can't go get volunteers, but at least it's going to fall under them. Beyond that, say some kind of a designer. You got to have somebody who can design well, and they don't have to necessarily do web and print, but you got to have, or when I say print, more like sermon series and things like that. They're going on slides or going to go on screen or maybe print. But it's ideal to have a designer on your team. And if you can find a talented person who also does video, that's really, really good. I find this a lot in churches. As they start to grow their teams, this is just a common thing. People get trained up and guess what they do? They leave and go chase more money. And you can't blame them, right? Because the church is notorious for not paying as much as like the company down the road that'll pay them twice and give them all kinds of benefits. And that's just the reality of it. So you have to really balance that and get really talented people and take care of your people. And that's the first thing. And the second thing is challenging them, really challenging them, because people that are in that creative space, especially because communications is more of the creative space, they want to be challenged. And you don't want to be stagnant. You don't want to hold them like, no, you got to stay in these rails and just do this. They will get bored. I have seen it a bazillion times. And so most times churches are calling me because, well, their designer chased money or they weren't being fulfilled in what God's given them as a gift and a talent. So I would say comm director is number one, some type of social media person is number two, graphic design. And then it kind of goes from there, like what? Because you can outsource website. You can outsource somewhat. You can outsource a little bit of video production. You can outsource, SEO experts, copywriters. You can find those. Of course, AI is an amazing copywriter these days. That's like your third or fourth person you can hire that don't have to hire them, right? So that's probably my answer, just off the top of my head.
Okay, I think that's helpful. I mean, and you've led a church communications team, so you've got you've got that perspective. I'll speak to it a little bit differently. I think the answer to the question is certainly going to be impacted by the size of the church and the overarching goals for the communications team. Because I think that's number one. I think if I were a communications director and I had a pastor or an executive pastor that I reported to, one of the things that I would want to work through with that leader is to help me define the wins and success for my department and my team. So what are the things, let's put it on a pie chart. Speaking of pie charts, let's put it on a pie chart. And if I have to divvy up my time and my responsibilities, what are the things that are going to carry the most weight? What are going to be the big pieces of pie versus the smaller pieces of pie that are going to help us organizationally move the needle with accomplishing our mission? Once I know what the key priorities and the expectations are for my leadership team, if I'm the comms director, the next questions I'm going to ask are, what are my core competencies that can help us accomplish these things?
Yeah.
What are the things that I'm going to have to do versus things that I can get other people to do?
Yeah.
What are the things that I'm actually gifted in and I also enjoy doing? Because what you don't want to do as comms director is take every little thing that you actually love doing and push that off onto other people and find yourself left only doing things that you find to be stressful and anxiety laden, right? Yeah. So if there are some creative elements and some creative things that you as a communicator are good at, maybe you're a good copywriter, maybe you're a good video editor, maybe you're a good graphic designer, maybe you want to hold on to some of those things. But I think there's a cautionary tale in that as well. I remember when we had Jennifer Sharp from the Northwest Bible on our show, one of the things that Jennifer talked about was, she moved from being the graphic designer of the church to being the communications director. One of the best moves that she made once she became the communications director was actually hiring a graphic designer, even though she's very, very gifted at it. And oftentimes it was almost more efficient for her to just take the job and do it herself. She realized that there were other responsibilities and other things that she needed to be doing that it just didn't make sense for her to be in the weeds doing the graphic design. She needed to find somebody else on her team to do that. And so whether you're staffing with part-time people, with full-time people, with contractors, you're outsourcing it, divvy up that pie, determine what your big responsibilities are, your deliverables, and make sure that you're staffed well enough to deliver on those deliverables consistently, and that you're meeting the expectations of your leadership team. My final thought on this is, and I've said this so many times in this podcast, don't forget to look at your pool of volunteers in your church. Yeah. One of my biggest pet peeves is the fact that communications directors are often expected to do everything. You don't expect your worship pastor to play all of the instruments on Sunday. You expect him or her to build a team of artists, some of whom might be compensated, some of whom are going to be volunteers. I would say probably most of the time in most churches, it's going to be volunteers. And that's going to be one of his skill sets, is recruiting, inviting, discerning talent, and putting people in places where they can help the worship team succeed. As the communications director, you're going to have to develop those same skills. You're going to have to develop the skills of figuring out how you can identify people in your congregation who have gifts that will help your team and put them in places where they can help your team win. There are volunteers out there that can do it. You're just going to have to be creative in identifying who those people are and putting them to work.
I'll just add a bow to that. Our friend Patrick Lencioni wrote a book called The 6 Working Geniuses. And the premise of that book is there's 6 working geniuses. You are gifted. God gave you gifts of 2 of them. Then he gave you 2 working competencies and 2 working frustrations. So if you take that assessment, it's like $25. You take that assessment, you and your team, you will quickly figure out what are your working geniuses. Mm-hmm. For me, mine's wonder and invention. So I spend all day just wondering and thinking and inventing. My weaknesses are tenacity, and I forget the other one. Meaning I'm not good at like checking lists.
You're not tenacious enough to even know what you're.
I don't even care, right? And so if you had me be the project manager having to check boxes, I would go nuts and I would quit, right? And so even though
your whole team would end up being frustrated because we'd all be depending on you to check boxes.
Before this book even came out, when I was a comm director, I'm like, I need a project manager. And I didn't mention that, but I needed a project manager because I'm the worst guy to be managing projects. My job is to create vision and direction and creativity and do what I do best. And I loved my job because I was in my sweet spot for years and years and years. And so if you get that book, 6 Working Geniuses, Patrick Lencioni, that's going to help you out a ton.
Okay, Mariah, I hope that answered your question. And thanks for sending that question in. And we've got more questions to tackle. We will do more burning questions episodes. If you happen to have a burning question, you can send us a message on Facebook, send us a message on our YouTube channel. You can email me, bblair@missionalmarketing.com, or send it to info@missionalmarketing.com. That's easier probably to remember. I will get those and we'll add them to our list, and maybe we will answer one of your burning questions on a future episode. Jason, thanks so much for hanging out with me. We are recording this the day before the 4th of July. So I wish you and everybody else listening a happy Independence Day, although everybody's listening to this is probably well past Independence Day and they forgot what it was all about. I hope you had good fireworks. One more reminder that if you haven't yet subscribed, wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, please be sure to do that. And we'll take your ratings and reviews. Leave us a 5-star review. Let us know what you love about the show, and it will help more people find the podcast. Thanks for tuning in.